the best chess opening traps in the Queen's Gambit. These traps arise after the initial moves, pawn to d4, followed by pawn to d5. The Queen's Gambit is one of the most popular chess openings of all time. Some of these are classical, and you may already be familiar with them. But if you're an advanced player, there may be new ideas here that can help you surprise your opponent. Let's begin with a classical scenario, when black accepts the gambit and then attempts to hold on to the extra pawn instead of giving it back to white. One of the common attempts by black to hold the extra pawn is to play pawn to b5, reinforcing the pawn on c4. Do you know how white can refute this attempt? The correct move for white is pawn to a4, aiming to undermine the b5 pawn, which currently supports black's extra pawn on c4. Now, what are black's options? If black responds symmetrically with pawn to a6, it actually fails. After white captures the b5 pawn, black cannot recapture because the a6 pawn is pinned, and doing so would result in black losing the rook on a8. What else can black try? Another common idea is pawn to c6, which at first glance appears solid. However, even in this line, black ends up in a losing position. After white plays pawn to a4, the best continuation is to capture the pawn on b5, and from here, white has a winning follow-up. Can you find it? Interestingly, this exact position once occurred in a real game played by the 4th world chess champion, Alexander Alekhine. Surprisingly, even he missed the winning move in this situation. If you can spot the correct continuation, let me know in the comments below. Perhaps you recognize it because it's a known theoretical line. The winning idea here is queen to f3, an unexpected and powerful move. Suddenly, there is no way for black to save the rook on a8, which leads directly to a winning position for white. That wraps up the first trap, a classical one. Despite its age, I just checked in the chess database, and even today, strong players rated 2,000 and higher still fall into this trap. So even if you already know it, it's highly likely your opponents don't, meaning you can definitely still use it in your own games. Let's move on to trap number 2. As we've seen, when white plays pawn to c4, offering a gambit, if black tries to keep the pawn with pawn to b5, it generally backfires. That's why in many games, black avoids trying to hold on to the pawn and instead simply develops with a more standard move like knight to f6. After white recaptures the pawn on c4, some players prefer to fianchetto their kingside bishop, a setup they find comfortable. So, they play pawn to g6. While this is not the main theoretical line, it is still quite common in practical games and may very well appear in your own matches. After the natural developing moves knight to f3 and bishop to g7, instead of continuing with another typical development move, white has a surprising tactical idea. That move is queen to a4, giving a check. At first glance, it may seem like an odd and unnecessary move, but it actually puts black in a tough spot. Let's break down why. If black blocks the check with bishop to d7, then white can retreat the queen to b3. Now take a closer look. This is a double attack on both the f7 and b7 pawns. On the next move, white can increase the pressure by playing knight to e5, aiming directly at those weaknesses. This puts black in an uncomfortable position very early in the game. The move bishop to d7, although natural, may actually not be the best choice. Now what if black tries something else, like knight to c6? In that case, something similar happens. White jumps with the knight to e5, taking advantage of the pin on the knight on c6. At this moment, white's knight on e5, together with the bishop on c4, attacks the f7 pawn. At the same time, the knight on e5 also threatens the knight on c6. Now black is facing two threats at once, and it is impossible to defend both effectively. This gives white a significant advantage in the early stage of the game. So far, we've seen that the natural defensive move knight to c6 leads to trouble for black. But what else can black try? Let's consider the idea of playing queen to d7 instead. Now here's a challenge for you. Can you find the winning continuation for white in this position? Feel free to write your answer in the comments. I'll give you a few seconds to think. The crushing move here is bishop captures on f7. This stunning sacrifice wins the game on the spot. If black accepts the sacrifice and captures the bishop, then white plays knight to a5, delivering a fork to the king and queen, a simple and beautiful tactical finish. Now let's go back for a moment. Is there any way for black to avoid disaster? Technically, yes, but it's not easy to find the right response, especially over the board. Let's look at yet another defensive try. Knight to d7. Interestingly, white can still apply the same tactical idea. Bishop captures on f7. Although the tactical motif is slightly different this time, the end result is just as powerful. After black recaptures the bishop, white plays knight to g5, giving a check. Now, no matter how black responds, Whether with knight to f8 or knight to e8, white continues with knight to e6, forking and capturing black's queen on d8, which has no escape. Now what if black tries to retreat with the king to g8 instead of blocking or moving a piece? In this case, the queen is safe for now, but after white plays queen to c4, there is no way for black to prevent the devastating queen to f7 checkmate, which will follow shortly. Does that mean all hope is lost for black? Not necessarily. The position is still playable, and black's simplest way to stay safe is to play pawn to c6, which gives enough breathing room and stabilizes the position. What's great about this trap from white's side is that it doesn't involve overextending or weakening your own position. You're developing naturally and maintaining harmony between your pieces. However, be mindful. If black responds with pawn to b5, it could target your pieces aggressively. So it's a good idea to play queen to b3, keeping pressure on the vulnerable f7 pawn and continuing normal development. That's what I really like about this trap. It's sound and practical. Even if your opponent avoids the tactical pitfalls, you still end up with a strong, active position. And that wraps up trap number 2, a lesser-known line that gives you a real chance to win some games against unsuspecting opponents. Now let's move on to trap number 3. We're back to the starting position of the Queen's Gambit. As we've seen before, black cannot safely accept the gambit and try to hold on to the pawn long term. That's why one of the most classical and solid responses is simply pawn to e6, supporting the center and preparing to develop. Here's another classical trap. This time, it's black setting the trap, and it's one you really must know. The idea starts with knight to d7, a move that seems harmless. I remember when I first joined a chess club, someone set this exact trap against me, and I fell for it immediately, not realizing how deceptive it was. At first glance, it looks like black simply missed that due to the pin. White can capture the pawn on d5. It appears white has won a free pawn, but not so fast. Black recaptures with the knight, and when white captures the queen, everything seems fine, until black plays bishop to b4, delivering a check. Now white has no safe way to block the check except by playing queen to d2, giving the queen right back. After the forced sequence, black ends up a full piece ahead, thanks to the extra knight, gaining a decisive material advantage. Here's another must-know trap, this time for black. It's a useful weapon if your opponent avoids the earlier traps. Let's say you try one of the typical traps, but white plays safely with pawn to e3 instead of grabbing the gambit pawn. You can still set a sneaky trap by playing pawn to c6. After white continues with knight to f3, now comes the surprise. Queen to a5. This move is tricky. It not only sidesteps the pin on the knight, but also sets up ideas like knight to e4 and bishop to b4, building pressure quickly. Many opponents unfamiliar with this line might just play routine moves like bishop to d3, walking right into the trap. In this case, your plan as black works perfectly. You play knight to a4, and it's not a sacrifice. White can't capture it with the knight on c3 because it's pinned by your queen. If white tries bishop takes a4, you recapture, and now white's knight is under pressure. If it retreats, the bishop on g5 becomes vulnerable. Often, white might try queen to c2, sticking to standard development. But here's the twist. You can now play knight takes g5. After white recaptures, you reveal a discovered attack by pushing your pawn, hitting both the bishop and knight. Once white recaptures the pawn, you simply take the knight, gaining material and securing a clear winning advantage.